The boy had no name that anyone cared to remember. In town, he was called the Orphan, or worse, that ragged child. His parents had been gone for as long as he could recall, taken by sickness that swept through the settlement 2 harsh winters ago. Since then, he had wandered the edges of life like a ghost, too young to fend for himself properly, too poor to be noticed, and too lonely to belong anywhere. Most mornings, the townsfolk saw him scurrying near the stables, collecting scraps of hay to sleep on at night. He would rummage through garbage piles behind the saloon or bakery, hoping for a stale crust of bread. The blacksmith's wife once chased him away with a broom, shouting that stray dogs had more sense than a child who begged. The sheriff didn't bother locking him up. He simply told him to move along whenever he lingered too close to respectable company. To them, he was an inconvenience, a reminder of tragedy best forgotten. But the boy had grown used to it. His eyes, too large for his thin face, carried both hunger and quiet determination. He had learned to survive with the barest things. A dented tin cup he'd found in the dirt served as his drinking vessel. A frayed blanket, left behind by some traveler, became his most valuable treasure. Thin and ragged though it was, it kept away some of the chill at night. When the world of men rejected him, he turned to the woods. Out among the whispering pines and thick oaks, there were no cruel words, no stares of pity or disdain. The forest seemed vast and alive, its silence more comforting than the bustle of town. The boy often wandered there barefoot, his small feet toughened by years of neglect. He would gather wild berries, chew on bitter roots, or chase squirrels in the hope of trapping one for food, though he rarely succeeded. Despite his hardship, there was a softness in him, a spark that hadn't been crushed. Sometimes, when the moon shone bright, he would climb a hill overlooking the settlement and stare at the sky, whispering to the stars as if they were listening. He dreamed of a family, of someone calling his name kindly, of belonging somewhere. Though the townsfolk gave him no kindness, he held on to hope like a hidden ember. That particular autumn evening, the boy's stomach growled louder than usual. He had found nothing edible in the town's refuse. Driven by hunger, he slipped past the last of the cottages and entered the woods with a stick in hand, pretending it was a spear. He thought he might scare a rabbit from the underbrush, though. He wasn't sure what he would do if he actually caught one. The forest was dusky and cool, its branches arching overhead like a cathedral of shadows. The boy walked deeper, humming softly to himself to push away the loneliness. Every crunch of leaves beneath his feet reminded him of his aloneness, but he pressed on. The farther he went, the freer he felt, away from scolding voices, away from sneers, away from the world that never wanted him. Still, as darkness settled, a small fear tugged at him. Nights in the woods could be unforgiving. Coyotes howled, owls screeched, and sometimes he thought he saw eyes glinting between the trees. But hunger was stronger than fear. He knew he would have to find something, anything, to put in his stomach before the cold night claimed him. Yet beneath all this hardship, there was a strange calmness to his wandering. He noticed things most grown men never did. The way the wind bent the tall grass, the way a fallen log housed entire colonies of insects, the way fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns when dusk deepened. These small wonders gave him comfort, as though the forest itself cared more for him than people ever had. As he crouched near a patch of wild berries, carefully plucking the few he could find, he thought of his mother. He barely remembered her face, only the lullabies she used to sing when she wrapped him in her arms. Sometimes he sang them softly to himself, not for the melody, but for the memory of being loved. Tonight, as he hummed under his breath, he wished, harder than ever, that she were here, that someone was here. He didn't know it yet, but the loneliness of that evening was about to change everything. The woods, which had always offered him quiet company, were about to present him with something unexpected, a chance not only to show his heart, but also to alter the course of his life forever. For within those shadows lay another soul, broken and in pain, who would awaken a courage the orphan never knew he had. And though the boy was only seeking berries to ease his hunger, fate had set his feet on a path where hunger would be the least of his concerns. By the time the night was done, the boy was crouched low to the ground, lips stained purple from the handful of wild berries he had just eaten. They weren't enough to silence his hunger, but they dulled the ache in his stomach for a moment. He licked the juice from his fingers and sat back against a tree, sighing. The woods had grown darker now, the last traces of daylight fading into a wash of deep blue. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled, and the boy shivered. Just as he was about to gather a few more berries, a sound pricked his ears, soft at first, almost hidden beneath the rustling of the leaves. He froze, tilting his head, his heartbeat quickening. It wasn't the call of an animal, nor the usual creak of branches. It was something different. A groan, low and pained, as if someone were fighting to hold it back. The boy's first instinct was to run. He had learned to be wary of strange noises, for they often meant danger. Hunters, wolves, or worse, men from town who might not take kindly to finding him wandering where he didn't belong. But curiosity rooted him in place. He waited, listening. There, it was again, closer this time. A stifled gasp, followed by the sound of something shifting in the underbrush. Swallowing hard, the boy rose to his feet, clutching his stick tightly as though it were a real weapon. His heart pounded so loudly, he thought whatever or whoever it was could hear it. Slowly, step by cautious step, he moved toward the sound. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him. He pushed past ferns and ducked under a low branch, his small body tense with fear. Then he saw it. A man lay slumped against the base of a fallen tree, half hidden by leaves and brambles. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath rasping as if it hurt to draw air. His clothes were torn, soaked dark with blood that glistened in the dim light. An arrow shaft protruded from his shoulder, the feathers broken and stained. His skin was painted with streaks of mud and sweat, but beneath it, the boy could see markings, patterns on his arms, painted symbols that spoke of a world beyond the boy's understanding. The boy's breath caught. A native. He remembered the warnings whispered in town. They'll scalp you alive if you wander too far. They'll sneak into your home and take what they want. They're dangerous. Savages. The sheriff had said those words more than once, and yet, this man did not look dangerous. He looked broken. His eyes were half closed, his lips cracked. His hand twitched feebly near his side, as though reaching for a weapon he no longer had the strength to hold. The boy's legs trembled. Part of him screamed to turn and run back toward the safety of town. But another part, something deeper, quieter, urged him to stay. He saw not a savage, but a person in pain. And pain was something the boy understood all too well. He crept closer, his bare feet silent on the forest floor. The man's eyes flickered open, dark and piercing even in weakness. For a moment they locked on the boy's face. The orphan froze, breath caught in his throat, certain that the warrior would lunge at him, but no attack came. Instead, the man's lips moved, forming words the boy couldn't understand. The voice was rough, hoarse, and faint, but it carried a weight of pleading. The boy didn't need to know the language to understand. He was asking for help. The orphan lowered his stick. His fear was still there, but compassion was stronger. He knelt beside the wounded man, close enough now to smell the iron tang of blood mixed with the earthy scent of crushed leaves. His hands hovered uncertainly, unsure what to do. I'll try, he whispered, though he knew the man couldn't understand him either. The boy dipped his tin cup into the stream nearby, filling it with cold water, and gently held it to the warrior's lips. The man drank, just barely, before coughing weakly, a drop spilling down his chin. The orphan tore a strip from his own shirt, threadbare though it was, and pressed it against the bleeding wound, trying to slow the flow. His small hands shook, but he worked carefully, his face tight with determination. As he worked, he spoke softly, almost as if talking to himself. "It's all right. You'll be all right. I won't leave you." The man's breathing steadied just a little, his eyes closing again, but this time not from weakness alone. The boy sensed a fragile trust forming, though unspoken, as if his presence itself was a balm. Darkness thickened in the forest. The boy knew he should return to town before nightfall, but his feet would not move. Something told him that if he left this man alone, he would not survive until morning. And though the boy had no family of his own, he could not bear the thought of leaving someone else to die in loneliness. So, with his meager blanket, he covered the warrior's chest, tucking it in clumsily. He sat nearby, knees drawn to his chest, fighting the chill that crept in as the crickets began their nightly chorus. The orphan did not realize it then, but in that simple act, choosing mercy over fear, he had already bound his fate to the man's. And by sunrise, the forest would no longer be quiet, for 200 warriors were already on their way. The boy barely slept that night. He sat near the wounded man with his arms wrapped around his knees, shivering under the canopy of dark trees. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves sent jolts of fear through him. He had never been this deep, in the forest, after nightfall. The moonlight filtered down in pale slivers, painting the warrior's face in silver shadows. The man groaned in his sleep, shifting weakly. The orphan's heart clenched. He had done what he could, given water, torn his shirt into bandages, covered him with his thin blanket. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the man died here in the woods with no one to mourn him? The boy's mind raced with the things he'd heard in town. The men at the saloon spoke often of savages, calling them wild and merciless. The preacher warned that they had no souls, that they were cursed people. The sheriff claimed they were liars who deserved no pity. The boy had been taught to fear them long before he had even seen one, and now here he was, alone in the forest with a wounded warrior lying at his side. His first instinct was to flee, to leave before he was discovered. He imagined the man waking, strong enough to move, grabbing him by the arm and dragging him off to some hidden village where he'd never be seen again. The very thought made him tremble. Yet, every time he looked at the man's face, the fear softened. He did not see a monster, nor the wild savage the townsfolk had described. He saw pain. The warrior's breathing was shallow, each inhale ragged. Sweat beaded on his brow, glistening faintly in the dim moonlight. His skin was warm to the touch when the boy checked the wound again, pressing his ragged bandage tighter to slow the bleeding. Fever. He recognized it. He had seen his mother burn with fever before she passed. His throat tightened at the memory. Something inside him shifted then. Fear was still there, clawing at his chest, but it was drowned out by something stronger, compassion. The boy had been abandoned, forgotten by the town. No one had shown him kindness, but this man, though stranger and foreigner, deserved not to be abandoned too. "I won't leave you," the boy whispered again, almost like a vow. He touched the edge of the blanket he had given the man, smoothing it over his chest, as if that act alone could guard him from death. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if helping him meant danger for himself? What if the man's people came looking for him and thought the boy had caused the wound? What if the settlers discovered he was harboring an enemy? Either way, the risk was real. But then he thought, what did he have to lose? The town had never claimed him. They would not miss him if he vanished. But here, now, He had the chance to matter, to save a life. That thought filled him with a fragile courage he didn't know he carried. The warrior stirred again, his eyes cracked open, heavy-lidded, and for a fleeting moment they met the boy's. Dark, sharp eyes, though dulled by exhaustion, studied him in silence. The boy felt his fear flare up, his chest tightening as though he were prey caught in a hunter's gaze. But instead of anger, there was something else in that look. Recognition, gratitude, perhaps even trust. The warrior raised his hand slowly, trembling as if even that small motion cost him. His fingers brushed against the boy's wrist, the touch light but deliberate. The orphan froze, eyes wide. It wasn't an attack. It was a gesture. A thank you. The boy swallowed hard, his fear dissolving into something different. An ache he couldn't quite name. It was the same ache he felt when he watched families in town, mothers holding their children close, fathers ruffling their sons' hair. The ache of wanting to be part of something. He shifted closer, speaking softly, though he knew his words might not be understood. You'll be safe. I promise. I'll keep watch. The warrior's eyes slid shut again, his hand falling back to the ground, but the faintest trace of calmness lingered on his face. The boy sat straighter, gripping his stick tightly as though it were a sword. The forest was vast and danger lurked unseen, but he had made his choice. He would not abandon the man, no matter the risk. Fear had met compassion in his small heart, and compassion had won. What he could not know, sitting there in the cold, with his blanket wrapped around a stranger, was that this choice had already set a chain of events in motion. By sunrise, the quiet forest would thunder with footsteps, and his life, once small and forgotten, would never be the same again. The night had stretched on endlessly. The boy's body ached from sitting on the cold ground, his arms wrapped tightly around himself to fight the chill, but his eyes never left the wounded warrior. Every few minutes he leaned forward to check if the man was still breathing. Each ragged inhale reassured him. Each shallow exhale reminded him how close. Death lingered. The boy knew nothing of medicine. No one had ever taught him. Still, he remembered scraps of things he had seen or overheard. The way the old woman in town once pressed cloth to a farmer's cut. The way his mother had brewed teas when sickness came. The way he himself had wrapped a scrape on his leg with strips of cloth until it healed. Fragments of memory became his only guide. He leaned close to the warrior now, whispering softly, I'm going to help you. Don't give up. The arrow wound looked terrible. Blood had dried in streaks across the warrior's chest, crusting around the broken shaft. The boy reached out, hands trembling, and pressed the strip of his torn shirt tighter against it. The fabric was already stiff with blood, but he kept it there, applying pressure as best as his small strength allowed. The warrior stirred, a low groan rumbling from his throat. His eyes fluttered open, dark and fevered, fixing briefly on the boy's face before drifting shut again. The orphan's heart clenched. He didn't know if the man understood, but he whispered anyway, Stay with me, please. He needed water. The boy scrambled to the nearby stream, dipping his dented tin cup and rushing back before spilling it all. He tilted it carefully against the warrior's lips. At first the man coughed, choking weakly, but then he drank, just a sip, but enough to ease his parched throat. Encouraged, the boy went back and forth to the stream several times through the night, his small legs darting quickly so he could return before anything happened. After each trip, he returned to find the warrior still alive, still clinging to breath, but water alone wouldn't heal the wound. The boy studied the arrow. He remembered how the blacksmith once said, An arrow's no good left in you, it festers like rot. The thought made the boy's stomach twist. Could he remove it? His hands shook at the idea. He was no healer. What if he killed the man trying? He sat there for a long time, torn. The warrior's skin burned hot with fever under his hand. The boy had no herbs, no medicines, nothing but his blanket and rags. If he left the arrow in, infection would surely spread. Finally, he made a decision. He couldn't just watch the man die. "I'll try," he whispered again, almost to himself. His voice wavered, but his eyes hardened with determination. He broke off the feathered end of the arrow to make it shorter, snapping it with all the strength his small hands could muster. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the trees, and the warrior groaned faintly. The boy winced but pressed on. Then, bracing himself, he gripped the shaft near the wound. His hands were slick with sweat. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pulled, steady but firm. The warrior's body jerked, a sharp cry escaping his lips even in his weakness. The boy froze, horrified, but forced himself not to stop. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, I'm sorry, over and over. With one final tug, the arrow came free, blood welling fresh around the wound. The boy tossed the bloodied shaft aside, quickly pressing his cloth bandage hard against the open flesh. He leaned his small weight onto it, desperate to stop the bleeding. His face was wet with tears, but his jaw was set in fierce resolve. Minutes passed like hours. Slowly, the flow of blood lessened. The boy adjusted the cloth, tying it tightly around the warrior's chest. His fingers fumbled with knots, but he managed to secure it in place. Exhausted, he slumped back, breathing hard. The warrior's breathing had steadied. Still shallow, but steadier. The boy watched his chest rise and fall, relief flooding him. He had done it. Or at least, he had given him a chance. The orphan pulled his blanket tighter around the man again. It was the only warmth he had, but he didn't care if he froze. He sat beside him, keeping vigil, eyes scanning the dark forest for danger. Each sound made him grip his stick tighter, ready to defend the man with whatever meager strength he had. As dawn's first light crept through the trees, painting the forest in shades of pale gold, the boy realized something had changed inside him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting for someone else, not just himself. The warrior stirred faintly, eyes half opening once more. His gaze lingered on the boy, and though he spoke no words, his look said enough. Gratitude. Trust. The orphan, exhausted but resolute, whispered back, I won't let anything happen to you. He believed it. Even if the whole world came against him, he would keep that promise. What the boy did not yet know was that others were already searching for their fallen brother. And when they found him, they would find the orphan, too. Brave, ragged, and standing guard. By sunrise, he would no longer be alone. The first rays of dawn spilled across the forest floor, chasing away the shadows of the night. The boy blinked against the brightness, his body stiff from hours of sitting vigil. He rubbed his eyes and stretched his sore arms, though his gaze quickly returned to the warrior lying beneath the blanket. The man still breathed, faint but steady. That alone was enough to send a wave of relief washing through the boy's chest. He had survived the night. The boy leaned closer, checking the bandage he had tied around the wound. The cloth was soaked through, dark with blood, but the flow had slowed. He replaced it with another strip torn from his shirt, wincing as he pressed it firmly. The warrior groaned faintly at the touch, but he did not resist. For the first time, the boy let himself smile. It was small, tentative, but it warmed his face. You're still here, he whispered. I was afraid you'd leave me too. The warrior's eyes flickered open. They were sharp even in weakness, dark eyes that seemed to see deeper than words could reach. He studied the boy in silence, his gaze steady despite the fever clouding. Them. The boy felt a tremor of fear again, but it quickly melted under the weight of that gaze. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't angry. It was searching, as though the man were trying to understand who this little ragged figure was, kneeling at his side with hands covered in his blood. The boy didn't know what to say. Words seemed useless anyway. He doubted the man would understand them. So instead, he held up the tin cup of water. Slowly, carefully, he tilted it to the warrior's lips. The man drank, weakly but with determination. And when he finished, his eyes softened just slightly. That was the beginning of their bond. The boy realized then that words weren't necessary. There were other ways to speak, through actions, through looks, through silence. All that morning he busied himself with small tasks to keep the man alive. He fetched more water, gathered handfuls of berries, and even caught a frog by the stream. He tried to roast it awkwardly over a small fire he managed to spark with flintstones he had once scavenged. The meat was hardly edible, but he offered it to the warrior anyway. The man accepted a piece, chewing slowly, though every movement seemed to drain him. When he was done, he gave the boy the faintest nod, a gesture of gratitude, plain and undeniable. The boy's heart swelled. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but of two beings sharing something fragile and real. The boy would hum softly while tending the fire or rearranging the bandages, and the warrior would sometimes watch him with a look the boy couldn't quite name. It was not the harsh scrutiny of townsfolk. It was respect, perhaps, or wonder. At one point, the warrior reached toward his side, his hand brushing against the ground until it found the broken shaft of the arrow. He picked it up weakly, examining it with a grimace, then dropped it again. The boy, not knowing what else to do, picked it up and flung it into the bushes. "Gone," he said simply, as though declaring the danger defeated. The warrior's lips curved ever so slightly, almost a smile. Later, when the boy shivered from the cool breeze, the warrior surprised him. With great effort, he pulled the thin blanket up higher, covering not just himself, but also tugging it slightly toward the boy, as though to share it. The boy froze, stunned by the gesture. No one had ever thought of him like that before. Not since his parents. He swallowed the lump in his throat, whispering, "Thank you." Though the man could not understand the words, he understood the feeling. As the day stretched on, the boy found himself speaking more freely, even if only to fill the air. He told the man about the town, about the way people looked at him as if he didn't belong, about the nights he spent in the stables or the garbage heaps. He confessed how lonely he was, how much he wished he had someone, anyone, to call family. The warrior said nothing, but his eyes never left the boy's face as he spoke, and in that watchful silence, the boy felt heard. When night returned, the boy settled close again, his small body pressed against the cold earth. He looked at the man whose breathing had steadied further and felt a strange certainty. Though they were strangers, though they shared no tongue, something bound them now, a trust forged not by words, but by actions, a silent bond. The boy could not explain it, but deep down he knew. Saving this man had saved something in himself too. The emptiness inside him felt a little less hollow. And though he could not know it yet, this bond, fragile and new, was about to change the course of his life in ways greater than he could imagine. For the forest was no longer empty. By tomorrow, the boy would discover that he and the warrior were not alone. The forest, which had felt safe in its quiet stillness, began to shift. The boy noticed it first in the birds. They startled easily that morning, taking flight from the forest branches with sudden flutters of wings. Squirrels, too, darted high into the trees, their chattering sharp and nervous. The boy, crouched near the stream filling his tin cup, felt unease creep into his chest. Something, or someone, was moving nearby. He froze, listening. At first there was only the gurgle of the water and the sigh of the wind through the pines. Then he heard it. Voices, faint but growing clearer, carried on the breeze. Settlers. The boy's heart leapt to his throat. He recognized the harsh tones, the careless laughter of men from town. He had heard those same voices jeering at him when they chased him away from the bakery, mocking his ragged clothes and thin frame. Now they were in the forest, and that could only mean one thing. They were hunting. His gaze shot toward the hidden place where the warrior lay. Panic surged through him. If they found the man, wounded and weak, they wouldn't hesitate. They would kill him without question. To them, he wasn't a person. He was an enemy. The boy dashed back through the underbrush, moving as silently as he could. When he reached the fallen tree where the warrior lay, his chest was heaving with fear. The man's eyes opened slightly at the sound, confused by the boy's urgency. "Shh," the boy whispered fiercely, pressing a finger to his lips. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the voices in the distance. He didn't know how much. The warrior understood, but he had to try. The warrior stirred weakly, attempting to push himself upright, but his strength failed. He sank back with a grimace of pain, his hand clenching in frustration. The boy knelt quickly, his small palms pressing against the man's shoulder as if to anchor him. "No, stay down. I'll hide you." With a burst of determination, the orphan scrambled to pull branches, leaves, and moss, layering them over the warrior's body. He worked frantically, covering the man's chest and legs until he was almost hidden among the forest floor. It wasn't perfect, but from a distance, it might pass for a pile of fallen debris. The voices grew louder now, closer. The boy's ears strained to catch the words. Must have gone this way. "Blood on the ground. See it? Don't let him get away." The boy's stomach twisted. They were following the trail of blood left by the wounded man. He knew they would be here in moments. His eyes darted around wildly. He had no weapon but his stick, no strength but his courage. Still, he planted himself in front of the hidden warrior, gripping the stick with white knuckles. His legs trembled, but he stood tall, determined to block the path with his small frame. Branches cracked in the distance. The settlers were close now, their boots crunching against leaves. The boy's breath came fast and shallow, but he didn't run. He couldn't. To run would mean betraying the man who trusted him. The warrior watched him through slitted eyes, his expression unreadable. But deep in those dark eyes flickered something like astonishment. This scrawny child who owed him nothing was standing guard. The boy swallowed hard and whispered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "You saved me from being alone. I won't let them take you." The voices came nearer, no more than a few dozen steps away. The boy could hear the twang of a bowstring, the click of rifles being checked. His body quaked, but he pressed his bare feet firmly into the dirt. If the men broke through the trees, they would see a ragged orphan standing over a wounded enemy, stick raised as if it were a sword. For a moment, the forest held its breath. Then, just as the footsteps drew near, the voices shifted away. One man called out, "Trail's cold! Must have veered south!" Another shouted back, "Then spread out! We'll catch him before sundown!" The sounds drifted farther and farther until only the rustle of the wind remained. The boy collapsed. To his knees, his chest heaving with relief. He turned to the warrior, whose breathing was steady but strained. The man's gaze was fixed on him, filled with something powerful, something unspoken. Respect. The boy's lips trembled, but he smiled shakily. "They didn't find you. I won't let them." He didn't know that his defiance had been witnessed, not just by the warrior, but by eyes hidden in the trees. Silent watchers had seen the orphan's courage, and by sunrise those watchers would return, not a handful, but 200 strong. The forest was never truly silent, yet that night it felt heavy, charged, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The boy had managed to keep the warrior safe from the searching settlers, but fear still gnawed at his small heart. He stayed awake long into the night, huddled near the man's side, listening for danger. Every snap of a twig made him tense. Every owl's call made his imagination run wild. The warrior, weak but alive, drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. Each time he stirred, the boy whispered softly to him, bringing water to his lips or adjusting, the leaves covering his wounds. Despite his exhaustion, the orphan refused to close his eyes fully. He had promised to protect this man, and he would, but just before dawn, the forest changed. The boy felt it first as a shiver along his spine. Then he heard it, soft footfalls, many of them, moving in unison. The sound was not clumsy like the settlers who had stomped through the woods. It was controlled, deliberate, like the earth itself welcomed their steps. His pulse quickened. He gripped his stick and crouched protectively over the wounded warrior, heart hammering. Were the settlers back? Or something worse? Then he saw them. Out of the mist rising between the trees came shapes, dark, silent figures emerging one by one until the forest seemed alive with movement. Warriors. Dozens at first, then more, until the boy could hardly count them. They moved like shadows, their eyes sharp, their bodies painted and strong. By the time the last one stepped into view, the boy realized there were hundreds. 200 warriors filling the woods, their presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The boy gasped. His little hands trembled against his stick, but he didn't back away. He positioned himself over the fallen man as if his small body could shield him. His voice shook, but he cried out, "Stay back! You can't hurt him!" The sound of his words echoed foolishly in the vast silence. The warriors stopped, regarding him with unreadable expressions. They could have brushed him aside like a leaf. In the wind, yet not one of them moved forward. From among them stepped a tall figure, broad-shouldered and commanding, his hair bound with eagle feathers. His gaze swept over the boy, then down to the hidden warrior lying beneath the leaves. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He spoke a few words in his language, and the other warriors murmured in response. The boy didn't understand, but he understood. The weight of the moment. They had come for the wounded man. "No," the boy whispered, tightening his grip on the stick. "He's hurt. He needs help. You can't take him." The leader tilted his head, studying him. Then, with surprising gentleness, he crouched so that his eyes met the boy's. His voice, when he spoke in broken English, was deep and steady. "You guard him?" The boy blinked, surprised that the man could speak to him at all. "Yes," he whispered fiercely. "I promised." For a long, tense moment, the leader said nothing. Then slowly, he straightened and lifted his hand. At his signal, 2 warriors stepped forward, but instead of pushing the boy aside, they knelt carefully beside the wounded man. With practiced hands, they brushed away the branches the boy had gathered and checked his injuries. The orphan's breath caught. They weren't here to kill him. They were here to save him. The tall leader's eyes softened. He spoke again, this time more clearly. "He is our brother. You keep him safe." He paused, his gaze steady on the boy. "Now, we keep you safe." The boy's stick wavered in his grip. Relief flooded him, followed swiftly by exhaustion. For the first time in days, he felt the crushing weight lift from his chest. He sank to his knees, his small shoulders trembling. The forest, once cold and lonely, now felt alive with warmth, not from fire, but from presence. 200 warriors stood around him, not as enemies, but as guardians. The boy dared to glance up at the leader. Will he live?" he asked softly, nodding. Toward the wounded man, the leader nodded once. "Yes, because of you." Something stirred deep in the boy's heart, something he had never felt before. He had spent his life as an unwanted orphan, shunned and forgotten. Yet here, in the quiet dawn light, surrounded by warriors who looked at him not with scorn but with respect, he realized he was no longer alone. By sunrise, the boy was no longer just a ragged orphan in the woods. He was the one who had shown mercy, the one who had stood guard against danger, the one 200 warriors now recognized as one of their own. The morning sun rose gently through the trees, washing the forest in gold. For the boy, it felt like stepping into a dream. Only hours earlier, he had been a frightened orphan huddled in the shadows, guarding a wounded stranger with nothing but a stick and his stubborn courage. Now, he walked surrounded by 200 warriors, their steps steady and sure, their presence wrapping around him like a living shield. 2 men carried the wounded warrior on a makeshift stretcher, moving swiftly but carefully. Every so often, the boy glanced at him, relief flooding his chest at the sight of the man's steady breathing. The warrior lived, his people had found him, but still the boy's small heart thudded nervously. What would they do with him now? Would they leave him behind once they reached safety? He had spent his whole life being cast aside by the townsfolk, by strangers, by fate itself. He couldn't bear to be unwanted again. The leader, the man with eagle feathers in his hair, walked at the front of the procession. Every so often he looked back at the boy. His gaze wasn't harsh, but measuring, as though he was trying to understand this fragile child who had stood in defiance of 200 men to protect one of their own. The forest began to change as they walked. The trees thinned, replaced by open land that stretched toward a cluster of dwellings nestled against the rise of a hill. Smoke curled gently from fires, and the sound of voices carried in the air. Children's laughter mingled with the rhythmic pounding of women grinding. Corn! Dogs barked, wagging their tails as they darted between the approaching warriors. The boy stopped in his tracks, wide-eyed. He had never seen anything like it. The village was alive with movement and color. Bright fabrics fluttered from wooden frames, herbs hung in bundles from drying racks, and painted designs adorned hides stretched to dry in the sun. It was a place full of life and belonging, the very thing he had always longed for. When the warriors entered, the village erupted. With emotion, women gasped at the sight of the wounded man, rushing forward with cries of recognition. Children clung to their mothers, peeking out from behind their skirts, their eyes wide at the stranger boy walking among the mighty warriors. Elders stepped forward, their faces solemn, their voices rising in a chant the boy did not understand. The leader raised his hand, and the village fell silent. With emotion, he directed the stretcher toward one of the large lodges at the center. He then turned, his gaze settling on the boy. The boy shifted uncomfortably under so many eyes. He felt small, ragged, painfully out of place. He wanted to shrink into the earth, but then he remembered the wounded warrior and how he had whispered to him through the night, promising he would not let him die alone. That memory gave him courage enough to lift his chin. The leader spoke in his own tongue to the gathered people, his voice firm and commanding. Though the boy could not understand the words, he felt the weight of them. All eyes turned toward him, and he swallowed hard, gripping his frayed shirt with shaking fingers. Then something remarkable happened. An elder woman, her hair silver and her face lined with years, stepped forward. She carried a shallow bowl of water, clear and cool, and held it out toward him. Her gaze was steady, kind. With trembling hands, the boy accepted it. He didn't know what to do, so he raised it to his lips, taking a careful sip. The village stirred. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but they were not hostile. They were approving. The leader nodded, satisfied. He spoke again in broken English, his deep voice carrying to the boy's ears. "You, child, no more alone. You with us now." The boy's breath caught. The words hit him harder than any blow he had ever endured. With us, not cast away, not unwanted. With us. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back quickly, not wanting to appear weak before so many strong faces. Still, he could not stop the tremor in his voice as he whispered, "Thank you." The villagers moved with new energy. Women rushed to tend to the wounded man, bringing herbs and bandages. Children crept closer, curious about the small outsider, who had stood at their warrior's side. One brave girl offered him a piece of cornbread, shy but smiling. The boy accepted it, his heart swelling with warmth. He had gone to sleep many nights with an empty stomach, but this bite of bread filled more than hunger. It filled the aching emptiness inside him. As the sun climbed higher, the boy realized that the village was no longer just a place he had stumbled into. It was becoming something far greater, a home. For the first time in his short, lonely life, he felt that he belonged somewhere. And as the wounded warrior stirred in his lodge, opening his eyes to the world again, the boy knew his story had only just begun. The days that followed were unlike anything the boy had ever known. For so long, his life had been one of wandering, rejection, and silence, where every face he met was a stranger, every night was cold, and every meal uncertain. But in the village of the warriors, something began to change. On the first morning, he awoke to the sound of laughter outside the lodge where he had been given a blanket to sleep on. The smell of corn cakes cooking over a fire drifted in, making his stomach rumble. When he stepped timidly outside, a group of children stopped their play and stared. He froze, expecting the mocking he had grown so used to in the town. But instead, one of the younger boys grinned, picked up a small carved toy horse, and held it out to him. The orphan blinked in surprise. Slowly, he reached out and took it. The boy clapped, and the others cheered as though a great ceremony had been completed. Laughter bubbled out of the orphan, awkward at first, then freer. For the first time, children were not jeering at him. They were welcoming him. That day, an elder woman guided him gently to where the other children were eating breakfast. She pressed a warm cake into his hands, and when he hesitated, unsure if he was allowed, she smiled and nodded. He bit into it, and his eyes widened at the sweet, comforting taste. His hunger was met not with scraps or disdain, but with generosity as the days passed. He was given small tasks, and each one made him feel part of something larger. One morning, he helped the women carry water from the stream. His arms ached from the weight of the bucket, but the older women chuckled, one of them ruffling his hair and calling him strong. The word struck deep inside him. He had always been told he was weak, too small, too fragile. Here, his effort was seen and valued. Another day, the children invited him to join in a game that involved tossing a ball made of tightly wrapped hide. He was clumsy at first, but instead of mocking, they taught him, showing him how to move faster, how to throw straighter. By the end of the game, he was breathless with laughter, his cheeks flushed with joy he had never known. But it was not only the children who began to fold him into their world. The warriors themselves acknowledged him in quiet ways. One evening, as the men gathered to smoke and speak, the leader, the one with eagle feathers in his hair, called the boy forward. He looked into the child's eyes for a long moment, then held out a small piece of carved wood shaped like a bird. "Brave," he said simply. The boy held the carving to his chest, overwhelmed. It wasn't just a token, it was recognition. These men, who had moved like shadows of power and discipline, were telling him he belonged among them. Meanwhile, the wounded warrior, whose life he had guarded in the woods, was slowly recovering. The boy visited him often, sitting quietly by his side. Sometimes he told him small stories about his life, the lonely nights, the empty streets of the town, the way no one ever wanted him. The warrior listened, his dark eyes soft with understanding. He never spoke much, but once when the boy finished, he reached out a weak hand and squeezed the boy's fingers. "You, strong," he murmured, echoing the word the women had spoken. The boy nearly cried. Even the dogs of the village seemed to sense his need for belonging. One, a mottled brown creature with alert ears, took to following him everywhere. When he sat, it curled beside him. When he walked, it trotted at his heels. At night, it slept at the foot of his blanket, guarding him. The boy had never had a friend so loyal. Still, the ache of fear lingered at times. What if this was only temporary? What if, once the warrior healed, they sent him away? The thought gnawed at him in the quiet hours. But each time doubt crept in, someone in the village answered it without even knowing. A smile here, a gift there, a kind word. Each gesture was another thread binding him into the fabric of the tribe. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, the boy sat with the children near the fire. An elder woman began to tell a story of the Great Spirit, her voice rhythmic and strong. The children leaned close, listening, their faces glowing in the firelight. The orphan leaned in too, caught up in the tale. He felt no different from the others. He was no longer an outsider peering in through a window. He was inside, part of the circle. And for the first time in his life, he did not fall asleep wondering if tomorrow would bring loneliness. Instead, he slept with the quiet certainty that tomorrow, and the day after, and perhaps many more to come, he would awaken among people who saw him not as a burden, not as a stray, but as family. The boy had never known what it was to be loved. Now, slowly, gently, day by day, he was learning. The day the boy's life changed forever began quietly, with the mist rolling low over the village. He awoke to the gentle sound of the river and the smell of smoke rising from morning fires. The mottled dog that had adopted him stretched at his side, yawning wide before nudging his hand with a wet nose. The boy sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and realized he no longer dreaded mornings. Instead of facing an empty world, he faced people who had begun to smile when they saw him, who called his name, who counted him among them. Still, he did not yet dare to hope too deeply. Perhaps it was only temporary kindness. Perhaps when the wounded warrior was healed, he would be asked to leave. That fear lingered in the corners of his heart, a shadow that refused to fade. That morning, however, something was different. The villagers seemed to be preparing for a gathering. Warriors painted their faces with ochre and black, women wove fresh feathers into their braids, and children hurried about with excited whispers. The boy followed curiously, his steps uncertain, until one of the children grabbed his hand and tugged him along. "They call the council today," the child whispered. "It is for you." For him. His heart began to pound. The villagers gathered in a great circle at the clearing's center. The fire crackled at its heart, sending sparks upward into the pale morning sky. The wounded warrior, though still weak, was carried out and seated with honor. When the boy saw him, he felt both relief and pride. The man he had protected was alive because of him. The elder with eagle feathers in his hair stood tall before the people. His voice, deep and steady, carried over the silence. "This boy," the elder began, gesturing to the orphan, "was found by one of ours, alone, lost, without family. But the spirits placed him in our path for a reason." The boy swallowed hard, every eye fixed on him. He wanted to shrink back, yet his feet felt rooted to the earth. The elder continued. "He showed courage where many grown men would have turned. Away. He shielded one of our warriors in his most vulnerable hour. He brought no weapon, no strength of body, but he carried the greatest strength of all. Mercy." A murmur rippled through the circle. The boy's cheeks burned. He looked down. At his hands, twisting them together nervously, the elder stepped closer, his gaze steady. "We have watched him these days. He eats with us, plays with our children, and works with our women. He listens to our stories. His heart beats as one of us. And so we must decide. Will he remain an outsider, or shall we call him our own?" The silence that followed was thick with weight. Then, one by one, voices rose. "He is one of us," said an elder woman firmly. "He has earned family," said a warrior. "My children already call him brother," said another. Soon the clearing filled with agreement. The boy's heart raced. Was this truly happening? The elder raised his hand, silencing the voices. "Then let it be so. From this day forward, this boy is no longer alone. He is kin. He is ours." The boy's knees trembled and tears stung his eyes. The villagers rose to their feet, warriors, women, children alike, and surrounded him in a great wave of warmth. The wounded warrior, still weak but smiling, beckoned him forward. When the boy came close, the man placed his hand upon the boy's head and whispered, "Brother." The word shattered the last wall around the boy's heart. All the loneliness, the nights of hunger, the cruel words and rejections, swept away by one word: brother. A cheer erupted through the village, and the people pressed forward, touching his shoulders, ruffling his hair, welcoming him with wide smiles. Some handed him small gifts, beads, feathers, carvings. The children pulled him into their midst, chanting his name. The dog barked excitedly, circling him as though it too understood the significance of this day. That night, a great feast was held in his honor. Fires blazed, drums beat rhythmically, and voices rose in songs that spoke of belonging, courage, and new beginnings. The boy sat among them, a plate of food in his lap, his heart so full he thought it might burst. As the fire's glow flickered on the faces around him, he realized something astonishing. For the first time in his life, he was not looking from the outside in. He was not a wanderer at the edge of the firelight hoping someone would notice him. He was inside the circle, wrapped in the warmth of family. When the elder stood once more and laid a blanket across his shoulders, woven with the colors of the tribe, the boy's breath caught. A blanket had once been all he had in the world. Ragged and thin, clutched against the cold in his loneliest nights. Now, this new blanket was not just for warmth. It was a symbol, a promise. He would never again face the world alone. As the drums echoed and laughter filled the night, the boy tilted his head back, staring at the stars overhead. His tears shimmered in the firelight, but they were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of belonging. He had found his home. He had found his family.